welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, May 24th, 2018. Hi again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani, back inside our New York City studio. As you can see, we are rolling three deep once again this week. That is Danny Segura of MMAfighting.com, the new Mr. Reliable. Here every week. We can't get him to leave. Jeff Wagenheim, who? And that, of course, is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall of The Ringer and MMAfighting.com. Of course, Jeff, we miss you. We love you. Don't take it personally.
90% reliable.
Yes, 90%. Well, this guy, though, I must say, he is unbelievable. He's like the new Cal Ripken. So, guys, we have a lot to discuss. Let's get right into it. Some big news yesterday. The UFC and ESPN are a thing. And not only are they a thing, because we talked about them being a thing just a couple of weeks ago, they're now an exclusive thing. And so let me get the numbers correct here. Let me get the information correct. I want to be sure of this. So these are the events that are going to ESPN next year. They have signed with the UFC. ESPN and UFC are together starting in 2019. 20 events on ESPN Plus, 10 events on ESPN, and 12 pay-per-view prelims on ESPN, and then all the prelims for the ESPN fight nights will also be on ESPN Plus. Hopefully that made sense. There's a bunch of other elements to the deal, including Contender Series on ESPN Plus, which we knew about. No mention, by the way, of The Ultimate Fighter, which we can get to in a second. But initially, I want to get your thoughts. And of course, let me just throw it out there that, you know, if in case you're living under a rock, I am going to ESPN next month. So, you know,
Full disclosure.
Full disclosure was the word that I was looking for, just so that all our cards are on the table. You used to work for ESPN.
I did.
You worked there for 3 years.
Yep.
And you were working there in a time where maybe MMA wasn't the top priority. What is it like for you, considering your experiences there, to see this come to fruition?
There's a part of me that still feels that's a really cool thing. I always wondered when I was there if it would happen. You know, I remember John Anik and Franklin McNeil and those guys, the original Kenny Florian, when they started MMA Live, it seemed like a big deal. If you recall at the time, there was an era of legitimacy, just seeing them, even in a web form, just seeing them on a website, sitting in a panel like this talking about MMA. I remember the whole process that went through, and then the Sure Dog share where they're talking to, you know, guys like Jake Ross, and all the way up to the point where I came aboard with guys like Brett Okamoto at the time and Josh Gross and some others. And I've just watched I thought at that moment this was a boom time, probably around 2010, when they started getting some money backing MMA and sending people to the events and stuff like that. I was really excited about that because I grew up just like you did watching ESPN. There's something about the flagship. There's something about the letters, the personalities, everything about it that seemed really cool to associate to this niche sport that it felt like we'd all carried to this moment. So I thought it would happen sooner. As we were there, I remember when they were first talking about getting a television deal, there was some whispering that maybe ESPN was a player at that moment. The MMA Live was going on then. But it didn't seem like the top brass at ESPN was really that behind it. You know, the Disney side of it and all that stuff. So you never got the sense there was major enthusiasm. There were certain players that would kind of force the issue to kind of give us the presence, and that made it cool. And I was there until 2013, and it felt like at that moment, they especially with the Fox deal and everything, they kind of took a step back, which was a little bit of a bummer, man. I have to be honest. So long story short, getting to this point where they have the chance to re-up and then they go and they get this deal done, especially exclusive. There's a part of me, I know a lot of the people still over there, there's a part of me that's like happy about that because it's the same thing. ESPN to me is like kind of, you know, sacred in its own way.
Mm-hmm. And so let me ask you, because you mentioned the word exclusive, highlighted that there was some talk that they would split this deal, right? Initially, we heard about the 15 events on ESPN Plus, but then we were kind of thinking that there would be another deal with a Fox. NBC had been thrown around. Turner was being thrown around as well. Now they're back to just being one place. Is this good or bad for the UFC, in your opinion?
I think it's good because we talked about like how now it's going to be split and you have to pay for ESPN Plus, but then, you know, we talk about free cards being on Fox, but, you know, you do have to pay for cable, right? And it kind of can make the audience a bit, you know, divided and cause a little bit of confusion. Now it's all in one place. And, you know, like we said, this was ESPN Plus. This wasn't just ESPN. So ESPN Plus, you know, it's still like a big platform. It's still attached to ESPN, obviously, but just the fact that now it's on the actual ESPN, I think it makes it a big deal. And one of the biggest things that we talked about this whole year was the TV deal, that the UFC had to get this right. And I think they did, and they hit a home run. Not only did they land at a place where it's dedicated to sports, but one of the biggest factors that we saw in the UFC's year was how the casual fans played a big role in their financials. And I think ESPN just, has the audience for that. So I think the UFC not only got the money right, but they also got the...
That's a great point.
Yeah.
300 million a year, 1.5 billion over 5 years.
Pretty good.
I mean, going from where they were at this year in the Fox deal, 160 million for the entire deal, to me feels like a win. I know the 400 or so number was thrown around, when the company was sold. That always seemed very far-fetched. 300 for, a product, let's be honest, this year, ratings a little bit down. You just doubled it.
It's a natural progression in a weird way, because you 300,000 or 300 million from 160 million would seem like a natural progression. The other part of that progression, though, is what was Fox Sports 1? It was brought in essentially to compete with ESPN. This was all very much, the UFC was one of their vehicles to do that. This was like one of the first, a lot of it seemed very experimental at the time. You remember there were certain shows that just didn't last. They were just throwing things in there. We saw evolutions even in how, basically with the UFC coverage, things like that. It's a weird escalation in the sense that FS1 was almost like a startup in the way the UFC was. So they kind of latched on. They were helping each other get to that. Now it goes to the one they were competing with. UFC goes to the one they were trying to compete with ESPN. At a perfect moment when they're launching ESPN Plus, and the simple as this: UFC fans are used to a paywall of some sort, and it just makes psychological sense for these two to go together. So, all of that said, it just feels like a natural progression for the UFC, and I'm glad, I guess, that I'm glad that they went one place. I was a little worried if they kind of sliced it up and did the pie thing.
Yeah.
It would get very confusing to follow the sport.
That's another good point. The point that you mentioned earlier, in that, so here we had, the situation with the UFC on Fox, and we're going to dig deeper into the sort of Fox relationship over the 7 years. But it felt always to me like Fox was trying to use the UFC to sort of launch these other brands, FS1, the main one. But even when they had Fuel TV, who was watching Fuel TV before the UFC came on board? Now it feels like the UFC is latching itself to ESPN to now be a part of this big party where there's the NBA, MLB, NFL, SportsCenter is still a dominant brand. So it feels different in that way. And it felt to me always like the UFC was suffering as a result of the fact that they were being used by Fox to propel these things. Yes, 4 times a year they were put on Big Fox, but let's be honest, when FS1 launched, the biggest chip that they had was the UFC. The main thing on that first day was a UFC event headlined by Chael Sonnen versus Shogun Rua. That was the lead-in to what was supposed to be their flagship show, Fox Sports Live. Like, they were using the UFC to try to build up all their other programming. Now it feels different, right? But there is a similarity in that signing the UFC and putting them on ESPN Plus, a lot of those events, is also helping to launch that as well. So clearly, despite all the injuries, and you ran down a laundry list of things that we have said.
I read the first 3, and I thought he was going to be done, but then I just kept going, and I'm like,
40 items.
I had to cut short, too. There was a lot more.
Oh, really? It's still something. Now, let me ask you about Plus, because my understanding is I'm still a dinosaur when it comes to paying for cable. I think you are as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You don't have cable, correct?
I don't, yeah.
Are you happy now that, I don't know the exact number, 60 to 70% of the cards are available to you now, the fights, I should say, for $4.99 off an app?
For sure, because, with cable comes a bunch of other channels that I don't have time to watch and that I frankly don't want to see, to be honest. So I'm not going to pay a bunch of money just for that exclusively. Now, if I can just get what I want, which is the UFC, and just pay $4.99, that's amazing. That's great.
Have you guys played around with the app yet?
I have not yet, but I mean, obviously, that's coming.
Yes.
You were talking a little bit about, I think it's cool that it's tailored. I like that idea of it being tailored to my, I noticed that ESPN has done that in it. You can plug in your teams on their site and stuff, but I do like the idea of it seeming like a personalized app that way.
The one thing that we still don't have the answer to is what this means for Fight Pass, at least in America, because again, I will preface all of this by throwing out the disclaimer that we threw out 2 weeks ago, which is this is a United States deal. So I've had a lot of people ask me, how does this affect my, my viewing habits in Canada, in the UK, in Brazil? This is just for the United States. So I know it's hard because this is such a global sport for fans to kind of figure that out and understand or try to make sense of what this means for them. All these deals are separate. So that being said, here we have a situation where the UFC is now aligning itself with ESPN, and they're putting all these events on ESPN Plus, but we don't know what this means for Fight Pass for us here in the United States. I still haven't figured that out yet. If they do come to, it doesn't seem like we'll be getting a lot of UFC on Fight Pass these days, come 2019, I should say. But there's still going to be the Invictas and the Cage Warriors and the EBIs and the other programming of the world,
and an archive, which is the coolest part for me. I mean,
it still feels though that like if they charged $5 extra so that it now becomes $9.99 for both, it still feels like most people are going to keep it, or do you feel like Fight Pass will suffer greatly?
I think it will suffer in the sense of its growth. I don't think like there's a lot of people that, once you pay for ESPN, I might not need Fight Pass. Right. But I think if you already have Fight Pass, you will likely keep it because it's not that expensive. And if you're a hardcore fight fan, you want to watch Invicta, you want to watch Cage Warriors, you want to watch EBI, and you have an amazing library. So I think it'll probably keep its fan base, but I don't see it growing much with the ESPN.
It'd be interesting to see because I think the initial thing was, when they launched Fight Pass, there was a lot of teasing that there would be big events on there as well, and so I think they were teasing like, hey, you don't want to miss out on UFC events. As that has declined, I feel like not too many people use it for those other things. There are certainly going to be diehards who are going to go on there and watch whatever's on, but I'm not sure that's the majority of the fan base. So it'll be really interesting. At the same price, I don't know why you wouldn't, in a sense. Right. It's just there. I look at it like as an archive. Every time you want to go watch an old fight, which I love to do frequently, you go in there and check something out, but it's right there. It's just that it is a library. So that part's really cool to me. And there are, Invicta and stuff like that, to be able to tune in and see what's going on in the world is fun too. So for a guy like me, yes, it makes sense. But I think a lot of the people, though, they're very UFC event centric, and if that's the case, I don't think those people stick around.
Are you surprised? We also have to see how the UFC treats Fight Pass in 2019. There's still so many questions unanswered. Are they going to have events on UFC Fight Pass? Who knows? But we do know the Contender Series is going to ESPN, and that has to hurt because that, in my opinion, that was one of their biggest selling points.
But I think that they were building the Contender Series for this moment. Ultimate Fighter not mentioned.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing?
Well, it was 28th season right now, 29th? I don't even know. I can't even keep track.
He's 28th.
The problem, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, but the bottom line is you can only keep a premise of a reality situation for so long, especially when it's, a bunch of alpha males living in a house and, hijinks and butting heads. That concept got old, in the teens, years ago. So I still like to know who's coming up. You still like to see the fights. There are still cool stories that emerge. But ultimately, it's run its course. I mean, you could look back at those first, 5 to, first maybe through 10, because that's when the heavyweights were. You could look at all those seasons, and I think it made sense. The vehicle made sense. People were still paying attention. But beyond that, I think it started to lose steam. And it's at the point now where I'm like, I don't even tune in. So
it's noise, right? It's just there. It's like exactly. I see the article pop up every Wednesday night. God bless AK Lee on our site. And it's just like, okay, there it is. And I'll read a feature like yours on Violent Bob Ross, but it's just, it's amazing because it's like, this is the light heavyweight and heavyweight champion. They're a part of this, it's insight into their coaching. We know there's no hijinks, but it's just kind of there. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And especially now, there's the NBA conference championship, and there's just a lot on TV on a Wednesday night to compete with, in my opinion.
And it's hard to keep something running so long. I think Vitor Belfort put it on pretty good terms. Like recently, everything has a middle, beginning, and end.
Yeah.
And everything has a purpose. Spike had its purpose for the UFC. Fox had its purpose for the UFC. But everything has an end. Yeah. And I think they've been pushing that line quite far.
I mean, at some point the context, right? Like these six-digit contracts and stuff. You realize are really hindrances. Most people don't want to go that route because it's not the most beneficial thing for their career. So once you start to know, all the what's going on, what they're using in the kitchen and all that, whatever the term is, like it loses something, and it's certainly gone well past that at this point.
We were talking about it being a home run for the UFC, and I think most people feel like this is a good thing. One thing we didn't mention when going down that list is that they kept production control, right? This is anyone who's talked to Dana White over the last decade knows that he always wanted to be with ESPN. I don't care what he said at that Fox, announcement back in 2011. ESPN was always the pretty woman at the bar that he always tried to, cozy up next to. And then on top of all of that, gets to keep production control. Are you surprised that he got what he wanted here?
Well, that part was, I think there were some talks back when I was there for MMA Live becoming UFC Live, and it was ESPN who says, no, you can't have editorial control. And I think that was one of the reasons. I don't know the full story. This is just always, how ESPN is. It's a lot of hand-me-down information. But in that sense, I was always like, well, ESPN is a big entity. They're not going to be pushed around. That's another weird thing about the Fox deals. I felt like they just let UFC come in and run rampant through their apartment and then leave, But
Trust
it's like,
me, I know.
So I didn't think ESPN would quite do that. And I don't really believe they will do that ultimately. You'll find out maybe. But I think we'll wait and see. But I will say that, just the production of the show, I think that was a smart move by ESPN. To an extent. There's probably something, I hope that they're open to feedback, to some suggestions and things, because we go on all the time.
Face the paint.
If Lucas here is talking about this stuff, to me, I don't really care. But if it's bothersome and there's some old things that can be tweaked, let's hope that they actually do that. But the production and on whole is amazing. And you got to remember, these guys so many times deal with fallouts in the last, 24 hours in advance, and they have to redo so much, and they do it just seamlessly. So to me, I'm like, the UFC production crew is about as good as it gets, so it's good.
And they have it down to a science, and they're very seamless and very, very clean with everything that they do. But yeah, I'm surprised with the fact that they have production. They're keeping the production, because I'm surprised just by this whole entire deal, the money, the fact that they landed on ESPN, the streaming, everything. So it's pretty surprising.
Well, in my opinion, John Anik is the best at what he does, right? I think Mauro Ranallo is the best combat sports broadcaster. He's the most versatile. But for the UFC, John Anik is the best. Yeah. And then when you consider people still love Rogan, we'll see how big of a part he is in this. But then you consider the job that they've done in developing analysts, Cormier, Cruz, finding a guy like Felder, right? Like who thought that he would turn into this? And they continue to find others, and the ones that they have on the desk are very good as well. It all makes sense. Like why go out and try to find new people when those people are doing so well? To me, the issue has always been, is it an honest broadcast, right? I was banging the drum about Aljamain Sterling and how they never updated us on his condition. They never even showed him, getting carted out. However, there was a nice little, improvement this past weekend where they did update an injury a minute or so later. And so it feels like maybe people are listening, and it feels like maybe they're opening their eyes to the idea that let's just the curtain doesn't have to be so steel-like, right? We can open this thing up and treat it.
I don't know.
If they're open to doing that, then I'm okay with it. If it's going to be presented like WWE, where we're not going to tell you the truth, then I think it continues to be a problem.
There's multiple things I had problems with in terms of, that's a good point about it being an honest broadcast. So many times they wouldn't mention, I don't know if they still do, will they mention Bellator? I don't even know. I haven't really paid attention to that.
Very, very rarely.
So, but they used to be reluctant to mention anything outside of the UFC. I don't feel like that's completely relaxed. There's the injury things is a big deal, and I feel like that's a smart thing. Another big thing that I've seen them doing of late is taking moments of silence, tribute moments to their own legends or people who've passed or had something happen. We've seen a lot of that. Even the Matt Hughes thing when they brought him up. It's all a learning process for the UFC, and I think the bigger they've gotten, the more scrutiny that fell on them, the more they've had to actually be a little bit more introspective on how they treat these things and how delicately they treat certain things. I'm glad to see them going the right direction. Honestly, I think that that's what always been the cool thing about the UFC. You feel like you grow up. If you've been watching the sport, you grow up with the MMA. Yeah. And the UFC is always the forerunner. So their mistakes become, we pay attention to the mistakes, and we pay attention when they correct them.
Yeah. It's also unclear, how long these broadcasts will be. I was talking with New York Rick on Monday. Only in MMA and maybe in the UFC in particular are you sticking to a set amount of time? For example, if a baseball game just like whizzes by, right? If it's 9 pitches an inning, they're not saying, you know, we blocked 3 hours for this on TBS. We're gonna stick to those 3 hours and just stall. Like the 7th inning stretch will last 15 minutes as opposed to 2 minutes. So
Let's kick it back to the studio.
I'm hopeful that all these ESPN Plus events, prelims and whatnot, if they whiz by, they whiz by because there's no commercials, right? Yes. There's no commercial breaks. It will be, in my opinion, or I think it should be, like how Fight Pass events are. I love Fight Pass events, right? Because those things just whiz by. So I'm hopeful that now that we're having, I think that's another wrinkle that hasn't really been brought up. This could actually be a great thing. Like the fact that when there's a fight night on big ESPN, so to speak, but then the prelims leading up to it are on Fight Pass, if those things whiz by, great, right? Isn't that... To me, I always said I'd pay extra to shorten up those events, and hopefully they don't go from 10 to 1, 6 fights or sometimes 130, right? But I think the other thing that was an issue was FS1 just didn't have enough programming. So to them, it was like, if we could get 7 to 8 hours of UFC, this is great. This is great. True. Like let's stretch this out.
Yeah, they want to be more economical with time, I would think.
Yes.
If you're on the flagship, or if you're, I don't know, is it ESPN? Will it be on ESPN flagship, or is it?
That I don't know.
We don't know yet. Yeah. Okay, but either way, ESPN2. It doesn't matter in some ways. You know that they've got plenty of programming, so that you think that they want to be efficient and get it, through.
So let's talk about the legacy, if we want to call it that, of the UFC on Fox. It's almost surreal that it's coming to an end. It feels like, in some respects, it just started, although it will have lasted 7 years. And I remember that day, the big announcement, like it was yesterday, with Joe Rogan reading off the prompter. He's got hair on his head. They ID'd, they confused GSP and Rashad Evans. Dana had a huge smile on his face. Lorenzo had a huge smile. There's Jay Glazer, the happiest guy in the world. And now it's all coming to an end. And so let's look back and talk about it. Was this a good relationship? Did this go the way we thought it was going to go? Ultimately, was it a win?
I think nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
So there's obviously going to be issues and pros and cons and everything. But I think it did serve its purpose. Like when we remember, like for example, just the Spike days, like just Joe Rogan rocking a black long sleeve, and it kind of just felt like it was just another programming of Spike, and it was just an extreme sport. And hey, look at this crazy thing, and they had Mansers there and all these other sort of bizarre shows. But yeah, with what happened with Fox, the Fox deal, is that it kind of put a uniform, it kind of put a suit and tie to the UFC. It kind of made it more professional, legitimized the sport. And, I think it did serve its purpose. People might not, I think the UFC is now a lot more respected, and just MMA in general, than it was when the Fox deal started.
Man, it's funny. I was kind of contemplating that. I think I had to kind of go back. I had to kind of remember when that first show with JDS and Velasquez was the bonus show in November of 2011, was it? And they had that, I think it was like an hour long, or was it 2? I don't remember. But they had one fight that was blocked off into an amount of time. And they kind of brought out the bells and whistles. The fight ends up being like just over a minute. Yeah. I remember thinking, like, at the time, because if you recall, going into it, it was just a landmark situation where they're finally on network TV. So this was like this... this next step in like legitimizing this sport, right? Like this is what we're always talking about, the mainstream and all this stuff. I don't know to what extent it did anything beyond that. Like it went on there, and I know that some people initially paid attention, but I felt like it became background noise in the end for people who just didn't care about it. You know what I mean? It wasn't like exposure to it in a broader sense like that brought more people enthusiasm, raised the enthusiasm. I really don't think that happened that much, but it certainly made it. I like the idea that it was ubiquitous with other sports. You'd watch, like you're watching, an AFC, or you're watching the NFC Championship football game, and they're advertising these guys, or they have somebody in studio during the NFL Sunday. That kind of assimilation was really awesome to see. I thought when I first saw it, I was like, wow, this is crazy. My two worlds are kind of colliding. People's awareness are going to be skyrocketing for these people. I think it certainly helped on those levels, and I think that it helped the UFC keep doing what it's doing, which is even when they fall forward. I feel like they've kept their thing alive of just moving forward with this thing, and that was the perfect step for them, I think, in the end.
By the way, do you guys remember who the analysts were for that first show on the desk? There were 3 of them.
Was it Menifee?
No, the analysts.
Oh, the analysts? No, I don't remember.
You don't remember? No. Dana White, John Jones, Brock Lesnar.
Wow.
What a
It
trio,
should
huh?
have just been 3 red flags.
You remember, you remember that? I remember Dana's face after the fight lasted just 61 seconds. And you could tell that he was, I mean, he was red. You could tell that he was fired up. But I also remember, Brock and John just being very uncomfortable and never to be seen again in those roles.
I'm going to have to go back and revisit that.
Yes,
That's funny.
You remember the co-main event that night was Benson Henderson against Clay Guida, which ended up being a phenomenal fight. No, it was on Facebook.
That's what it was.
The entire card was on Facebook. Except the main event.
I remember that fight, so I mean, obviously it wasn't dark, but it wasn't shown as part of that broadcast.
I agree more with your sentiment than Danny's. I think if everyone's really being honest here, there is no way this went the way they thought or hoped it was going to go. First of all, the fact that it only lasted 1 contract is a sign that this kind of didn't go the way they thought it was going to go.
Well, they're also competing against ESPN, right? Which
I mean, yes, but I mean, it's very clear that Fox chose WWE here in this. They just signed SmackDown, and so maybe they feel like, hey, we can control things better. Fights aren't falling through. Whatever the case is, it didn't go. FS1, I don't think is where they would hope it was going to be 5 years later. The ratings are what they are. We know what the ratings are. It didn't seem like, hey, if you put Demetrius Johnson on Big Fox, he's a star. And I think that was the hope. You put Benson Henderson. Remember how many times they put Benson and DJ?
And we used to debate this all the time.
It didn't translate. It didn't translate. For whatever reason, it didn't translate. It was seen by more people. More people saw Kane and JDS than if they were on Spike or, FX or Fuel. But what did that really translate into? And then you could say, well, in the Fox era, Ronda and Conor became megastars. But did they become megastars because of Fox? Yeah, sure. Conor fought, he fought in Boston against Dennis Seaver, and he fought on that first FS1 card, although lower down against Max Holloway. But would they have become megastars with or without Fox?
Yes.
I kind of feel like they would have. Yeah. So who did Fox create?
I wouldn't say they created Nate Diaz, but he used his platform the smartest. He was the only one after that, Michael Johnson, and just did that, because that was the one moment where I was like, wow, that platform was perfect.
But again, would it have happened regardless? If he would have hit that same promo on pay-per-view or on cable as was the Big Fox?
I think it's because he went up there and just, he's cussing on this channel, which was, you look at it as from a broadcast network like that, and you think, he just has no idea the rules. He's up there like spouting cuss words and stuff. In that sense, I felt like it was the perfect platform for people to pay attention. Because I just remember, everybody writing and talking about that when it happened. So, but would he have got there? Probably, because he probably would have probably found another route to it. And the bottom line was, the way they came together in the end, it was fascinating, because you're like, you know what I mean? It was like, what would happen if a Diaz brother fought McGregor? And then you got it. It was really like that. So we knew who Diaz was before then. So I just think he used that platform well. To me, can't think of a single person though who it was an actual catalyst to be a star for.
Out of Fox. But I mean, it's still got a lot of eyes on the sport. You were just talking about how, like, the prelims were on Facebook. Like, how many people were tuning in that actually, I think the people that watched on Facebook already knew it was happening on Facebook and were fans of it. Just the fact that you can, go on your TV and go.
But remember the last show on Spike, Jason Mayhem Miller against Michael Bisping, tough. That peaked over 3 million viewers.
That's crazy.
They can't get 3 million today on Fox.
It's also the landscape of MMA. Like, back then we didn't have nearly as many fights. Ultimate Fighter was a big deal, and those guys were on the Ultimate Fighter on the same channel. We didn't have nearly as many cards as well. There's a lot of factors as well. That
I still think that factors in. I mean, just fatigue. I mean, we talk about this all the time, but at some point, I think everybody suffers this when there's too many cards.
Yeah.
But
it's a fun little.
And it's hard to distinguish in the end, though, the Fox from the Fox Sports ones and all that stuff too.
It's a fun little exercise. Actually, go back to the first ever episode of this show, MMA Beat episode 1.
Yeah.
It's me, Luke, and Mike Chiappetta, and we're talking about the first Fox, the first year of the Fox deal, and Luke is talking about how the roster has ballooned, the number of events have ballooned, and they ordered this, right? They ordered this menu of fights, which then led to somewhat of an oversaturation. But then we bring up also, the stretching of the events. Your main events were happening at 1 to 1:30 a.m. Eastern time. To me, that's not a recipe for building stars, right? You could have 600, 700, 800,000 people watching, but you're supposed to crescendo with these people. Like look at Lomachenko fighting a couple of weeks ago. He's fighting at 10 p.m. There's people watching at 10 p.m. on the East and West. 1:30 is just tough. So I hope that there are lessons that have been learned here where they looked at, because honestly, I mean, and again, I have the relationship there, so I'm trying to be as, neutral as possible here. I don't see, and there's a lot of people I like that still work there, but they were handcuffed. Let's be honest. We all know who was running the show. I just don't see that many benefits that came out of this relationship. I really don't.
And I felt like each negative that came out of it was enhanced. The website itself. I remember because there was a couple of guys that we knew very well, colleagues who went over there, and the way that kind of all ended was not a good look for them. The pivot to video and all that stuff. And then, I'll just leave it at that. But I mean, there was negatives that kind of blew up and at pockets in there too that didn't help the situation.
So another thing that hasn't really been brought up, and this is a very fresh story, but you recall when the UFC left Spike. They had that 1 year period where they couldn't show any other live events, and then they got Bellator. And so I'm wondering if Fox gets into the MMA business. Do you feel there's not that many options?
There isn't.
But it still seems like a business that would make sense, especially now that you have WWE, because way back when WWE was on, Spike, they had the Ultimate Fighter,
Tough, right? Yeah.
They went right to Tough at 11:05. That was a huge deal for Spike, and for the Ultimate Fighter to get that. So I kind of feel like it would be in their best interest to find another league. I just don't know which promotion that is.
Yeah, that would be the issue. I mean, Combate is already with Univision. So
but that's Spanish.
That is Spanish. They don't have an English broadcast, neither an English broadcasting team. So I guess that could be an option. And Combate actually puts on very good production, I think. But I mean, it's just. It's also gonna with a platform as big as Fox Sports and just Fox in general. I feel like you sort of need already a certain level of MMA. Combate is still a very new promotion, and a lot of the guys are debuting 0-0 or with shallow records. So I don't know if that they will exactly want that. And then it's hard to come across high level MMA if it's not Bellator or the UFC. Maybe one, but one is doing their own thing. So. I just don't see who they could possibly
Imagine
find.
they do a deal with Bellator. They cut a deal with Viacom to do 5 big events. I just feel like you've been the home of UFC for 7 years. It would seem strange to just let that go. And so I'm wondering. I don't have any insight as to whether or not they're going to stay in the MMA business, but FS1 still needs that live programming, right?
Yeah.
So
it would be intuitive for them to do, I would think, but then again, the synonymous letters were UFC, so I don't really know. I mean, that's a tough one.
Yeah, a lot of people also have been asking me, what happens to the analysts, what happens to the desk? All those people work for the UFC. They don't work for Fox, so one would imagine they're just going to be brought over, unless it's someone that is not very well liked. And it will be interesting to see if they try to put a fresh coat of paint on the presentation. Right?
And I think they should, because every time you have something like this, like a big change, this is a great opportunity to change
evolve.
things around. Yeah, and for example, you brought up the honest broadcasting for a second, and I think this is a perfect opportunity to sort of switch that around, because at the beginning, the UFC was still very young, so you kind of had to sell the sport. You kind of had to be like, oh, this fight's amazing, maybe fans don't appreciate the technique, but this fight's great. Now you can be a little more honest. The UFC's already, and MMA is very well established, so.
I would love to see that, because honestly, I mean, let's be honest.
I don't think it needs that anymore.
UFC tonight, it was hard to watch for me because, and I'm not trying to knock it or, in terms of the efforts put into it. I know you were part of the show at one point, which was a good segment, I thought. But it's it just was hard to watch because it felt like they were perpetuating a cult rather than, perpetuating a product that smart people think about. It was just, what I'm trying to say? They're breaking down football on the ESPN. They're talking about the negatives too. They're talking about teams and their failures. They're talking about a coach who's under fire for some reason. They're not just puff piecing everything, And I feel like that I would like to see that kind of steer more into the reality of the situation rather than just keep trying to uphold this cult vibe.
And that has helped the sport grow, because that's the type of information that you want. You want people debating. You want, talking about the negatives. You want the whole spectrum, all the angles. With the Fox Sports, it was more like selling the UFC, selling the product. Oh, look, we had got this amazing thing. But again, it's been since 2011, the UFC has come a long way. I think MMA, just the sport in general, is a lot more respected and actually taken seriously as a sport. And I think it's time for that change. And I think you can make that change now.
You can be critical and be smart. And I feel like ESPN has done that very well over the years. I just hope I hope it can continue that with UFC.
Yeah, I saw some people debating, you know, what's the bigger jump? Spike to Fox, Fox to ESPN. And so there's no doubt that going from Spike to Fox is a gigantic leap.
100%.
And so maybe that's why they put on all the bells and whistles and they made such a big deal about it. But again, as I said, it feels like at least Dana has always wanted to be, you know, in business with Mickey Mouse and Walt Disney and everyone there. So.
And Fox has, you know, took the lumps in terms of what you do and what you don't do in a lot of ways. So I think ESPN can learn a ton from just going back over the same day we're reviewing it and saying, like, here's what we don't want to happen. Here's what we want to happen. You know what I mean?
Another thing that hasn't been brought up that, you know, there's a lot to figure out between now and January, but do the rankings go away? Because that was a suggestion.
Just wondering that.
Of the executives, because they wanted to sell, you know, 4 versus 6. I would suggest getting rid of the rankings.
Yes.
I feel like I don't think anyone is tuning in because they see those numbers, and I think it's actually brought upon more headaches for the powers that be. So I kind of hope they get rid of the rankings.
And again, I was talking about the kind of cult vibe of these things. This, again, was one of these things that was instituted that had an Amway feel to it or something like this, pyramid scheme or something through the rankings. I think it would be smart. I think there's more negativity that comes out of the rankings than positives at this point.
Yeah, maybe that's something where, you know, you want to rely on an independent ranking.
True.
You know,
we've been through this. I would love that part.
I like the idea of the rankings, but again, I think it has to be independent because it's nice knowing, you know, who's at the top. It's nice knowing, okay, these two are fighting. This means more because, you know, he's fighting number 2 or whoever that person may be fighting. But it does create a lot of headaches. I mean, we've seen negotiations. Just the welterweight division was a perfect example of the rankings. People don't want to give up their spots.
I know, it's weird.
And it's just tough. I mean, I think rankings will always bring pros and cons as far as whether they're independent or not, but it's nice seeing those numbers. I personally like them. But
it's just like a belt or an interim belt or whatever you want to say. Like, there's a symbol to it. Like, so if you got a number 3 ranking, well, you're better than number 4, right? I mean, it's just... It's that's all it is.
And I feel like the UFC obviously hasn't respected the rankings because we've seen 13 fight, you know, for the title, and we've seen that. But at least it kind of holds them a little bit accountable to that because, okay, well, we have numbers next to these guys. Without the rankings, it could be whoever just has more hype, and there's no accountability there, you know? Oh, because, you know, then this guy, in many people's eyes, they can say he's ranked number 1. But there's no official.
I mean, the way they did before the official UFC rankings was like that. You just kind of knew, and there was everybody ran their own independent rankings usually, and those were fairly flush. It was pretty obvious who the guys number 2 and number 3 were. You know what I mean? Like, to everybody, you don't have to beat people with the dead. You know, to beat the dead horse over like, hey, this guy's 3 or 4. You know what I mean? I just feel like it just makes more sense at some point for there to be an independent rankings or something like that to emerge. And the UFC to almost, you know, maybe to spiritually or something kind of connect to it. They don't have to literally do it. You know what I mean? Like they used to, essentially.
Let's look ahead to this weekend. And, you know, I often feel like going into a fight, I'm not right, but I often feel like I have some sort of feeling inside. Like, I think I know who's going to win a fight, right? Like I thought Joanna was going to be Rose. I was 100% wrong, but you kind of have a feeling.
Yes.
I cannot decide how I feel about Darren Till versus Stephen Thompson. To me, I get a headache thinking about it, and I love that. I mean, I just can't wait for this fight. I am so excited about this fight. Do you guys feel like you have a sense of where this is going to go? Because I feel very torn on this one.
Yeah, I don't. And, you know, just thinking about, like, the way... Because I'm, you know, getting ready to write the predictions columns on
good luck
MMA
with that.
Fighting. Yeah. And, you know, there's certain... I think it comes down to Darren Till, because we know what we are going to get with Wonder Boy, right? For example, if John Lineker's fighting someone, I know what John Lineker brings to the table, you know, and he's a very skilled fighter. I know what he brings. But with Darren Till, he sort of has this mystique about him, and I was very critical of the matchup with Stephen Thompson. But, you know, now I'm kind of doubting myself because Darren Till, I mean, this is a guy who, when he started the UFC, he really wasn't, you know, turning any necks. You know, he wasn't really turning any heads. And now all of a sudden, like, we see what he's doing, right, and the way he's talking. So. I don't know. It makes me wonder, you know, maybe, you know, he makes another big jump and he gets a victory against Wonderboy Thompson. Who knows?
I'm with you guys 100%. Yeah. I especially agree with what you're saying because I agree. Like, I can usually look at something like you have some kind of just whatever in your mind will sort of form a favorite. You're like, that guy will, you know. This is very difficult, and there are a lot of reasons. There's all kinds of intangibles. Just the fact that it's basically set up as a showcase for Till in his, hometown of Liverpool is either pressure or like a crazy amount of pressure, or it's like just his big coming out party. That's the first part. You just look at that because you can imagine that either way. Then the Wonder Boy thing. If he was coming on, let's just say he was coming off the Hendricks fight right now, I'd be like, oh man, Wonder Boy. I wouldn't bet against Wonder Boy, But it's just that we've seen him not as masterful. He fought good fights against Woodley, but it wasn't like the masterful performance. He wasn't using his legs as the same way. He wasn't just carving him up with every shot. It's always kind of where you leave it. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that with Till or not. I mean, it's just one of these types of things that you're not sure. I go back and forth as well, but I love that. That the best thing is to me is that when a fight is like that, you really can't put a beat on it. It's very similar to me as the Miocic Ngannou fight, because as much as I kept thinking about Ngannou and what a monster he was coming up, it was hard for me to 100% think that he was going to go in there and beat Miocic. There was always something in the back that's yeah, but Miocic has the experience. He's done this a lot. He hits hard too. People keep forgetting he's a monster in the division. So it's one of those types of situations for me. But that's the perfect setup.
Yeah, and it's just amazing that this card is taking place in Liverpool the day before Liverpool playing the Champions League.
Imagine if Liverpool wins.
If Liverpool wins on Saturday and then Till wins on Sunday,
that place is going bananas. They couldn't have
scripted this.
No one's going to work for a week.
They couldn't. Do you guys like the Sunday afternoon card? The rare Sunday afternoon card?
I love it. I think it's great.
Like it?
Yeah, it starts earlier.
Yeah.
That's always nice. I was reading, for example, a few days ago, some of the things that came out of UFC Chile, from Chile, actual media from there. And some people were kind of complaining, some journalists were complaining how long it was, how long the event. Those guys
it's
were
like
probably
mainstream journalists? Like sports journalists? Or MMA
I
journalists?
I saw a few columns here and there, just MMA related. But yeah, these events are super long. So at least if you're going to make them super long, start them a bit earlier.
I feel like this is coming from someone with no kids, but Sunday afternoon with a kid, right? It's a little tougher.
And it's obviously it's catering to their market, which is cool. But I do like the change of pace. Sundays, I watch, since I was a kid, I've watched sports on Sundays, you know what I mean? So it just makes sense to to watch something like that. From a writer's standpoint, if you're doing a post-fight column, it's not as fun to sit down and try to form a big picture or anything right after an event, because things are still unfolding, even within the hours of it, happening, injuries, et cetera, et cetera. That's a little tougher, but that's just the work, technical side of things. As far as the viewing, I don't mind it at all,
Does this feel, we were asked about this a couple of weeks ago, and now that we're actually here, and the fight is, 3 days away, does it feel like Conor in Dublin? Does it feel like that, or
not exactly? Conor's special and he had his own thing going, so it's hard to compare anybody against him. Plus, that Dublin card had so many other Irish, all the SBG guys. It felt like something. If you run down this card, I think the co-main event is Neil Magny versus
Craig
White.
Craig White.
So, and if you just run down the card, there's some good fights out there, but it doesn't feel like it was tailor-made for Liverpool. But nonetheless, this is the showcase for Darren Till.
I thought it might play out like that, but it has not. Liverpool, in my mind, has that kind of feeling to it. There's a passionate fan base and all that stuff. But Conor was. It's easy right now to be like, well, Conor McGregor, that guy, But if you think back to where he was when he was going into that Dublin card, you went out to it. It was a fight night, and you're going out to it because it was that big. And also there was still this. Jeff Wagenham's like, I need more proof of this guy. There was really a sense of but can he keep this up? He's got the charisma. Can he keep winning? Can he keep doing this stuff? And that was magic. That was like a magical time for MMA. It was when he was doing that. I'll always look back at that as magic. So this one doesn't really come close to that.
Yeah.
We'll also have to see once the weigh-ins happen, the sort of the hype and that gets brought up. So
yeah.
I don't mean to beat a dead horse on this one, but I'm just so disappointed in Bellator 200. I really felt like there was an opportunity to do something special here. And the fact that it's airing on tape delay in the U.S., it lost its main event, although I will say that the title fight should always be the main event, so there's somewhat poetic justice here, although I hate to see Mirko get injured. It's good that Mousasi and Carvalho are fighting in the main event, because the belt deserves that. It just feels like it should have been so much bigger. They were just in San Jose a couple of weeks ago. That should have been 200. That's Coker's backyard. Why isn't Paul Daly fighting MVP? He just fought 2 weeks ago. Why was he fighting John Fitch and not?
That's the
MVP
big.
in London. Like, it's just, there's so much here that just doesn't make sense
They
to
got
me.
into that scuffle.
Yes.
What was that? And I mean, you had the
a year
perfect.
ago.
I just don't even. That's the one thing that I'm like, I don't understand. I just don't get that.
This card should feel bigger, right?
I mean, it feels like any other. It doesn't. I don't even think it feels like a tentpole even the ones that they throw. I mean, I would argue that maybe Bellator 199 felt like a bigger deal.
Heck yeah, it did. There's not even a heavyweight tournament fight attached to this, and that's like the crown jewel of their year, right? I can't quite, and I know that, you know, they have a presence in England, and I know the international audience is important to them. It just feels like such a big mistake.
Yeah, and I don't want to, you know, it's funny because there are certain Bellator commodities, certain names that you're like, they do compel you to, you pay attention, at least they should. Michael Chandler's one of those guys because you know who he is. Like, it should compel. I know his numbers weren't that great in this last one, but there are certain guys that were Bellator guys the whole way that you should pay attention to. There's guys like Dave Rickles, who I don't know what it is, but they always seem like they're just below what the Bellator star would be, right? So like, and he ends up in these fights with these guys. In this case, Michael Page, right? And you think, it's Michael Page, but he's almost like Leaping Lanny Poff or something. It's like he keeps showing up in these weird things where he's probably booked to lose. I don't know, but it's like those types of fights. I don't know. I'm just not that into them. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to be a bad mouth on Rickles because he's a good fighter. He's actually put together a nice little run here. But it's just there are guys like that who surface in these cards against the known names. I want the names that are at that level to fight each other,
especially on a card like 200, right? Because those numbered events don't really stick out. At least in Bellator, for me, they stick out in the UFC because we've been programmed. But for 200, I mean, Wonder Boy versus Darren Till is the obvious pick for the best fight of the weekend. But excluding that one, is there one that sticks out?
Well, man, it's hard. I mean, this is probably nothing will happen because he'd be an idiot to make this happen. But Charlie Ward is fighting on this card. And it's almost like it has its own sub-drama because it's going, you know, who knows what happens in this
fight. We know what happened the last time he fought.
Exactly. So that's just, it's just something that's on that card.
That's your most anticipated fight of the weekend?
Yeah. No, it's not the most anticipated. I was trying to think though, like, Gegard Mousasi, man, it's hard not to, like, because that guy I feel like could be. His first fight was kind of mediocre. I feel like I'm pretty anxious to see what he's able to do in this next one here.
Yeah. I would actually go with the David Rickles MVP because, like, if you look at the way MVP has been matched up, it's always been against guys that, you know. Guys that we know that's just a showcase fight for him, right? Obviously, we don't know until the fight happens, but that's mostly like what the feel of the fight. David Rickles kind of feels that way, and I agree with you. But like at the same time, he has a pretty good record. I think he's 19-4. This guy's a proven veteran. He's fought in the big stage before. Has had big fights. This guy has been in there with Michael Chandler. You know, and he's pretty legit. I think this is this is not Paul Daly obviously, but I think we have a pretty good fight here. And I think if fans are looking to see MVP tested, I think he will in this.
It's just. I agree with you 100%. I'm not trying to badmouth David Rickles. I mean, he's also a really cool guy. Like, I've talked to him at the Mohegan.
Why do you hate David Rickles?
No, I've talked to him. He's a great guy. He's a good fighter. It's just he hasn't. I'm trying to say, like, with their names, you know, like the guy just doesn't. He's been in this one space. Maybe, like, let's say he goes and beats MVP. Does he get a good name off of this? No, it just ruins the MVP thing. And I'm like, you'd rather they put him into a MVP into a fight that would draw the draw the spectacle together and be like, wow, okay, now we get to see really what he's made of. And maybe we do, but I'm just saying it doesn't have in prospect any kind of big time enthusiasm attached to it.
I agree with you though. The Mousasi fight is probably most intriguing other than Wonder Boy versus Till, only because almost lost his debut. They, Mousasi and McDonald were their two big, free agent prizes last year. So they need him to win. I would imagine there's even talk of maybe those two fighting each other in the future. And also for Carvalho, he's sort of been that forgotten champion for Bellator.
He doesn't get much credit.
If he wins, what a huge feather that is in his cap. You can always kind of tell with those Bellator events who they kind of want to win. You know what I'm saying? They probably they would never admit it.
They've had a hard time getting the guys.
But they had that event in Chicago last month, and everyone who you think they wanted to win, Dylan Dennis and Fedor, those people won. So you kind of have a feeling that they want Mousasi to win, but I'm just very curious to see how Mousasi looks in that second fight. I'm also curious to see my friend Makwan Amirkhani fight because he's talking a big game. He says that he wants Cub Swanson after this fight against Jason Knight, and then he wants Max Holloway. So he's been out for over a year. Yeah, I'm curious to see how he looks as well. So I mean, there's interesting fights.
I'd like to be more interested in the Phil Davis fight, but it seems like when I have low expectations, his fights are better. So it's almost like you want to have no expectations going there and you get pleasantly surprised.
Aaron Chalmers of the UK version of Jersey Shore, which I know you're a big fan of, right?
The UK version of Jersey Shore?
Yeah, Geordie Shore.
No, I've never seen it.
You're not a big Aaron Chalmers guy.
Well, I don't watch too many UK shows.
Okay. Well,
not too many
you know,
UK
you can get it
television.
on YouTube.
But I have seen Jersey Shore. Not the latest one, but
not his version, though.
Not his version.
No, Geordie Shore. It's
Geordie Shore.
Geordie Shore. Yeah, so that's this weekend. Bellator 200 on Friday. UFC in Liverpool on Sunday, so you have that one-day break in the middle. A couple more things before we switch over to After the Beat. Ian McCall announces retirement this week. What is Ian McCall's legacy? What a crazy, unfortunate 3-4 years it has been for him, but how will you remember Ian McCall, Chuck?
Man, so going back to before he was in the UFC, I felt like there was very few guys who had real buzz to them, but I felt like he was one of those guys. Is it Tachi Palace?
Yeah,
Tachi Palace.
So you would see that, and it was almost like, you're like imagining Jabba's palace or something. It was like, what Tachi Palace? It was like this weird, almost had this king on a flying carpet or something coming over there. You know what I mean? So they introduced this division. We saw him. I remember Jordan Breeden did a really cool piece on him.
Yes.
He had the the mustache and all this, and I just thought, who is this character? You heard him speak, very articulate. He was actually a little incendiary. I thought. And he was I would say that he was kind of a pioneer in a weird way of the flyweight division because there weren't the flyweight division because there weren't a ton of names in there. And I think he was just hovering before it was truly established as the number one guy. So all of that said, it was almost like his reputation preceded him to the UFC. But then he gets over there, has that crazy fight in Australia with Demetrius Johnson, and there was the way that all went down. I feel like that was kind of emblematic of what we heard, right? Like you thought, like, this is actually, he really is this. And it's been a weird odyssey for him since then, really. I mean, he's had some good moments, but he's had a lot of down moments. He's had some bad luck. I just think that in my mind, for now, and obviously this sport is very young, he still strikes me though as one of those guys who is a pioneer for, like, on some level, a pioneer for the lighter weight classes.
For sure.
And
he wasn't even in WEC as a flyweight, right?
Exactly.
So I actually remember the press conference. I think you were there. Were you at UFC? Was it 140 in Toronto?
Yes, I was
Machida versus John Jones. That's when Dana White announced the four-man tournament.
That's right.
And the tournament was very foreign to them at that point. They weren't doing official tournaments. Maybe it was sort of unofficial the way they were booking things. But I remember him announcing at the post-fight press conference that they had signed Ian McCall, that Joseph Benavidez was going down, that Demetrius Johnson was going down, and they also signed Urshitani, and they were going to have this this four-man tournament. And I remember talking to McCall on that Monday, and it felt almost like, like when they open women's featherweight, and it's a natural, he was Cyborg to the flyweights, right? So it was like, this is your big chance in the UFC. They finally opened your division. He was the face of the flyweights. It wasn't DJ wasn't the favorite going into that. It was McCall.
The third, because if you think about it, like Benavidez, it was almost like it was tailor-made for him because he lost 2 times at Cruz.
Yes.
So it was like, okay, we got to create a division for this guy to run some, but we have this guy we're bringing in.
Yes.
And so I remember, when that came out, I was fascinated by that thing. So, it's kudos to McCall. It tells you where McCall was to have that kind of thought process.
Yeah, sure. It definitely felt like, as you said, like there needed to be a division because Demetrius Johnson had also lost to Dominic Cruz. So
true.
They had he dropped down. So it just felt natural. And dude, Ian McCall had been fighting the best outside of the UFC. I mean, he fought Jusir Formiga.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like he was fighting nobodies. He was at the top of the game even before he joined the UFC.
I'll always remember McCall. Pounding away and screaming. And remember this, Demetrius Johnson? Because I mean, first of all, who does that, Demetrius Johnson?
When was the last time you?
And so, that's the main thing. So it's like a rare visual, but it's also, it just kind of gave you a glimpse of his personality, I know
Dotson sort of rocked DJ in their first fight, but DJ has never been in a position quite like that since.
Right. I don't want to take anything away from Dotson, but we know that in MMA, any punch can land at any given moment. McCall was literally on top of Demetrius and had it full hooks and had his back and was just pounding.
I appreciate how honest he is about that, how candid he is about that, and like, you know, you ask him the question, regrets, and will this keep you up at night? And he says, yes, it will probably keep me up at night. In retrospect now, it seems like that night in Australia, or that morning or afternoon, because it was tailor-made for the North American audience, almost became symbolic of his run in the UFC. It was just bad luck after bad luck. The rematch didn't go his way, and he never got to get that third fight, which seemed like all he had to do was win a couple in a row to get that third fight against DJ. Never happened. And the last few years, the bad luck that he has had is just
not just in fighting. Like, you know, there's tragedy in his gym. There's like, there's been so much he's had to process, overcome. You know, his personal life. I mean, he's just all of it. He's one of those true players, very smart, but almost a fringe player. Maybe wouldn't have had a spot in another. You know, fighting was a perfect field for him. You know what I mean?
Yep. And then he gets the shot in Ryzen. And he gets the fight, probably the best flyweight fight that you can get, even though the fight wasn't taking place at flyweight, but the, you know, the best fight that you could get for his weight class.
Around,
and it lasts 9 seconds.
I mean, that just
and his first Ryzen fight, he gets cut. You know, like, and it's just an unfortunate ending there as well. It just
proves that, you know, the fight game. Sure, it's about skill, but a big part of it too is having, you know, good luck. But I want to share a personal memory about him, McCall. He was actually one of the first people I ever interviewed, like, in MMA.
Okay.
And I remember I was in college. I think I might have been like 19 when he went to Florida and fought Demetrius Johnson the second time. So I took a buddy of mine. I'm like, yo, let's just, you know, try to interview fighters outside of the workouts and whatnot. And I had reached out to him on Twitter, and he was the only one that gave me time. He's like, okay, here's my email me. We set up an interview at the hotel. I went and talked to him. It was a super shitty interview, by the way. But I just remember him telling me, he's like, yeah, just keep at it. Like, if you want to succeed at anything in life, just keep at it. Don't, you know, be persistent. That's what he told me. Be persistent and don't stop. If you don't stop, you're bound to succeed.
Wow, that's a great story.
And, you know, I think he was my first interview. And you know, I didn't stop, and, you know, here
that was
I am
2012
today.
as well.
Yeah. When they went to Sunrise, Florida.
That's right. I remember that in June. Charlie Brenneman against Eric Silva.
Eric Silva. Scott Jorgensen versus Eddie Wineland. It was one of those cards that I think the fans got to pick where it went.
The hometown throwdown, Harley Davidson. What a ride it has been.
It's been a long.
Okay, let's talk about a Florida-based fighter before we say goodbye. Kamaru Usman with a win on Saturday night in Chile.
Barcelona, I think.
You emphasize the end a lot. Just Chile.
I like to give it a little oomph at the end. Anyway, it's always like Chile with a question mark. He beats Maia, but it doesn't feel like it did what he wanted it to do. And maybe that's just the struggle with fighting someone like Maia.
100%.
What do you make of the win and where he goes from here?
I mean, we knew, I think you hit the nail on the head on the MMA Hour. I mean, we knew if Maia was going to lose, he was going to lose something like this. And we knew if somebody was going to beat Maia, it was going to look something like that as well. The way he won, it definitely didn't help him. If he would have gone in there and knocked out Damian Maia, which is something, you know, nobody really has ever done.
It's like hardcore, one guy. You know?
Yeah. Then it's like, okay, wow, like, you know, that would have been a big moment for him. So it definitely didn't help him, you know, his performance. But I will say he just needed somebody, he just needed a legit win. I'm not saying, you know, Emil Meek is not legit or anything, but we know Maia is part of that upper echelon. So now he has that under his belt, and I think he's up in the rankings now. I mean, at the end of the day, he has a win over Damian Maia, which is...
A lot of his are decisions, and obviously this always factors in, regardless if we, you know... I know he's undefeated in the UFC, he's had a good run, but a lot of them are decisions. I think that he's not done enough. I think people are afraid, not afraid, but people don't want to fight him probably. It's not the top of their priorities. But he's also not a guy who's just like emphatically going through guys. So it's like, I feel like he's in that weird position. I do think he's going to have to take another fight, obviously, before he gets into a title type of discussion. Who would that be? I don't know, man. I honestly think that maybe this weekend's fight could be, you know, the winner of this could be the guy. But I still feel like, let's say that Till goes in there and just goes right through Wonder Boy.
Yeah.
You have a guy who's really then flying high. I think this would be a huge coming out moment for this guy. So to put him against Usman seems very like, I don't know, but at the same time, I wouldn't be opposed to that fight, you know?
You're already taking a huge gamble match right there until versus Thompson. If it does come through, I don't know if you want to roll the dice again with Usman. I think what it should have happened since day one, I know Tyron Woodley is healthy, right? He says he's healthy and he's looking to return in August. RDA should have been fighting Tyron Woodley, and Colby Covington should have been fighting.
What if Covington loses to RDA? Because if he wins the interim title, there's no way they're going to book him against Usman.
Right.
But if he loses, I feel like that's the fight. And then if he wins, okay, now we'll figure something else out. But if he loses, at that press conference in Brooklyn, they were the most entertaining duo.
Yeah,
they weren't even fighting each other. Do that one. Right? Yeah. Till, though, went on Twitter, had a pretty good, take on the fight as well. So it doesn't seem like he's necessarily shying away, because if you don't want the fight, you're not, you're not talking about that.
I'm not surprised that Till wants it.
I mean, to a degree, it doesn't seem like it would be the best matchup. Did Usman make a mistake, though, by talking about the hands? Because it seems like the 30% comment from January really stuck, and then people hear about the hands and they're like, come on, man, it's another thing. I felt like, for the record, I believe him 100%.
Yeah.
But I felt like he did himself no favors by bringing that up, because
it's
fans
tough,
were just
man.
looking for a
if
reason.
You win a fight, and I understand, like, you want to, like, let's say you just didn't perform the way you thought, it didn't go the way of it. You want to kind of point out why.
Yeah.
But it's also weird from a spectator. If people big picture should think about this a little bit, even if they think they broke their hand or something like that. Like the biggest, the one I always think of is the Durandame one, because she wins a fight, and it wasn't the greatest fight. It was a controversial fight against Holly Holm. And immediately she points out an injury that she suffered 2 fights ago or something like that. I mean, so the thing that we're building towards becomes like towards the Cyborg fight, this big showdown, is just immediately thrown into question. Mm-hmm. And that's the last thing you want. What you want is to just have one moment where you can optimistically think ahead.
I know he's on a bit of a losing streak as well, but I don't hate the idea of Usman fighting Masvidal, because Masvidal is very rarely in boring fights. He's game on the ground as well, somewhat underrated. And I feel like that's another, he needs at least 2 more, impressive wins to get into that conversation. I don't think he did enough to leapfrog.
It's tough, man. I appreciate him. We always talk about, hey, good for Damian Maia stepping up on short notice to fight this guy. But I always have to think about that guy fighting Damian Maia on short notice, because that's a tough assignment, man. Yeah. It's tough on a lot of levels. He's so dangerous, but it's also like he's going to make it aesthetically unpleasing if you're beating him. That's the bottom line. You know what I mean? So he was able to do that. It's like it's not like he advanced. As far as it's like he did get a nice name under his belt, but it's not like he advanced anywhere in the picture. I think you're right.
As far as fan perception, for sure. I mean, it's also, you got to keep in mind, like, fighting Damian Maia, like, it's such a difficult thing to look good against. Everyone has had such a hard time with him. So, I mean, it was a tough task for him, but I do think that he didn't do himself any help, like, by bringing up the hands. I remember specifically when Dominic Cruz, I forgot which fight, I think it might have been one of the favorite ones, but he had broken his hand and he chose not to say anything. Dana White was actually the one who said that Dominic Cruz had broken his hand, and he's like, "Yo, how come you didn't say anything?" He's like, "Nah."
Dominic Cruz should be the study for everybody, who wants to see how you do. What do you do after a fight, after a win, and after a loss? This is how you act.
For Maia's sake, I hope he gets a non-wrestler next, because now it's 3 in a row.
Yes.
Woodley, Covington, and Usman. I hope he gets someone that.
I appreciate the guy's optimism, but you're right. It's like his best moments are when he has the opportunity to dictate some of the fight. Yeah. If he can't do that, it becomes an exercise in, frustration, essentially.
Right. All right. Great stuff, guys. Now, if you are watching us on Twitter, stay right there. After the Beat is coming right up. If you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook, MMA Fighting, go to live.twitter.com/MMA Fighting. There's the address. Same place as always. As I said, if you're watching us on Twitter, stay right there. You have sent us some questions. We have some answers for you.
So no matter,
on a scale of 1 to 10 this week, I'll give them like a 7.
Do better, people.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
Do better.
Well, the problem is when they ask us, they'll kind of go, and rightfully so, they go with the news of the week.
True.
But it's a lot of stuff that we
already covered.
Yes.
People need to regard that. That's true.
If you watch the show enough, you kind of figure out that after the Beat, we like to go with the stuff that we haven't covered, because then it's redundant, right?
Yep.
I found some. It took some searching, but I found some good ones for you. Go to live.twitter.com/MMA Fighting right now. After the Beat is coming up next.